What's going on, everyone? We're live here in the Eagle newsroom. I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle alongside Robert Cessna and our special guest, Stefan Krajisnik from the Clarion-Ledger. He covers Mississippi State, and he'll give us a little bit of perspective on what's going on over there in Starkville. Stefan, thanks for joining us. What's going on in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. It's nice to catch up again, and obviously always a fun matchup when A&M and Mississippi State are squaring off, especially when Mike Leach is involved. So it's been busy. It's that point in the football season where basketball is actually kind of creeping up on you, and it's all about to really get going after a pretty slow off season with Mississippi State baseball struggling. It was a longer summer than I expected, so I'm excited to get back in the swing of things. Yeah.
Sure thing. And of course, Robert Cessna before, mentioned that we might be covering a basketball game this weekend with how Mississippi State usually scores points. Let's get into the way we start all these videos, and that is, what is the main storylines, talking points, keys that Mississippi State has undergone so far this season, and what you're looking for heading into this game this week?
Yeah, the number one storyline with this team has been the experience, right? Like you see so many teams, especially with the transfer portal now, almost rebuilding every year, trying to get something new going. It's Mississippi State's kind of done it the old-fashioned way in the sense of they got a lot of players back from last season. I mean, A&M fans are going to see players that they probably recognize from the 2020 team, let alone, last year's team. So that's been the number one storyline, is that this team, the expectations for this team have been, all right, we got everyone back. Is this coaching staff going to make every player take that step forward to get where this program thinks they can be this year? That's been the number one thing, I should say. And then coming into this matchup specifically, it feels like a huge storyline is the Mississippi State offensive line, because it's a unit that really hasn't been tested too much this season besides that LSU game, and they didn't look particularly strong in that game. On top of which, their left tackle, Dollar Bill Johnson, goes down in that game against Bowling Green. No update yet on his status for this upcoming matchup. And that's obviously a huge thing. Replacing Charles Cross, left tackle, is huge for Mississippi State, and that passing offense, protecting Will Rogers' blind side. If it's a unit that's struggling and shorthanded against a defense like A&M's, and then you look ahead at Arkansas, Kentucky, Alabama, the teams ahead on this schedule, a lot will be determined this season by how this offensive line plays, and that's the number one thing that I will be watching against the Aggies here.
Stefan, I'm interested in the matchup, obviously, of their offense. Watch some of the LSU game, and they looked so good in the first half, and then they struggled to score. And I know Bowling Green, they bounced back, but that's not a Power 5 conference team. What about what problems do you feel that the offense had against LSU, and how do you see those rectified against A&M possibly?
Yeah, I think going back to it, the number one thing was that offensive line. I mean, Will Rogers had no time to throw. LSU was loading the box, which is weird because, typically we're seeing teams drop 8 against Mississippi State, right? And I think LSU saw, hey, if we have a chance to get, to Will Rogers quick enough, it doesn't matter how many, defensive backs we got back there. We'll be all right. They can cover them for long enough if you're getting pressure on them. So I think when the offense has been struggling, that's been the key. And we saw a bit in that Bowling Green game, Mississippi State tried to combat that with some more quick screens, because even the running game, which has been better this year, at least through those first couple games against Memphis and Arizona, the running game was actually pretty good. And then against LSU, the running game, got shut down a bit as the game went on. So if you're not having a running game to combat, the defensive line coming at you quick there and overloading the box, you got to get the screen passes going or something to get the ball out of Will Rogers' hands quick. And against Bowling Green, that opened things up later to take some explosive plays and take some shots. But that'll be the number one thing, is if Mississippi State, if Texas A&M is getting pressure on Mississippi State, is Mike Leach going to be the one to quickly look at those screens and get the ball into hands of players like Tulu Griffin and let them make plays and try to take advantage of maybe some over-aggression that A&M brings?
Go ahead.
Oh, I know early in Mike Leach's tenure at Mississippi State, there was a little bit of shuffling, not necessarily set on one quarterback and trying to figure that out. But over the last little bit, Will Rogers has separated himself as the guy. What was it about his game that developed and progressed that made him the guy? And how has he settled in not only to this offense, but being one of the best statistical quarterbacks in the SEC this year?
Yeah, I think he's just done a really good job of understanding, Mike Leach's offense. Like he's putting up, people call him a system quarterback at times, and that depends on your opinion. I mean, there's reasons that he's not, as highly touted of an NFL prospect as maybe some other guys, but I think he goes beyond just being a system quarterback here. But what he's done really well is learn this offense. I mean, he's making checks at the line that he wasn't making his, freshman and sophomore year, just because he's learned it through this experience, through watching film, through that, like really what it takes for the air raid specifically to click. He's not he doesn't get annoyed with those, check downs and screen passes, because he knows those are the plays that in the air raid open up the more explosive plays. He's really patient. His coming out party really, at least on a national level, really felt like that game in A&M last year. I think you guys would agree from watching that. I mean, that was one of his better games, just in terms of how he managed that environment, how he managed going up against that caliber of a defense. And he saw and A&M, try to mix it up. Jimbo tried to mix it up with the man coverages versus the drop eights, and trying to throw different things. And every time Jimbo tried to do a man, Will Rogers saw it, and Mekhi Polk was his guy to go to when it came to that. So that was kind of one of those games where you were like, okay, he's starting to understand what it means to play at the SEC level while running this offense. And I think it's really kind of built since that game for him. And I think at this point, Leach is really comfortable with calling in a play, and if Will see something different at the line, letting Will change it. So I think there's just a comfort level, from that experience that's really built, into him having the type of season that he's had so far. I mean, leading the nation in passing touchdowns.
Funny you should mention that, because I remember that game last year, if I'm not mistaken. It sticks in my mind. 46 of like 59. A&M couldn't get pressure to them. And if I remember right, going in that game, there were some questions about Mississippi State's wide receivers, that they were having drops. Didn't have drops, got rid of the ball quickly. You mentioned about the offensive line maybe being a little bit down this year, or maybe don't know about the last game. How much better are the receivers than they were, do you feel, than last year?
Yeah, I think the receiving core is better than it was last year. I think it's deeper. Leach at the bare minimum likes to have 8 guys, 2 that play each of those 4 wide receiver spots. And then he'd like to have, 9th or 10th that can step in there. And he's kind of had a bit of that this season, but the 8 baseline guys that they have, they're very comfortable with. They have had some issues with drops this year. Guys like Ra Thomas have had those issues. Caleb Duncan is a guy who's kind of stepped into Mekhi Polk's role and done a pretty good job of it. When you see him, he's got the frame to be a really good wide receiver. It's just a matter of doing it consistently, and he's got, I think, 5 or 6 touchdowns this year. So he's starting to mesh, but he struggled in the LSU game. That's his first time really playing in an environment like that too. So there's some young guys, in that core who are learning. But against Bowling Green, Tulu Griffin is the guy that's the most dynamic player on this offense. He's kind of one of those outside receiver spots, and he's been dividing a lot of reps with Ra Thomas at that spot. And I think against Bowling Green, they were kind of like, listen, like Ra's good, but he's a bit inconsistent, and we're really trying to get this offense humming. And Tulu is a guy that in the return game has shown so much explosiveness that he almost reminds me of Cordell Patterson, in the sense of just get him the ball somehow and he'll make something happen, right? And I think they did that a bit with screen passes and quick passes to him against Bowling Green, and it limited the snaps that Ra Thomas had. But I think that's kind of just acknowledging that, hey, we got a guy here that can really be a game changer. So that's the guy, in that receiving core this year, and especially in this weekend's matchup where A&M, better have him circled, because State's going to go to him if they can.
I expect this to be somewhat a game maybe in the 20s, because A&M's defense is so good. And from what I can tell, Mississippi State's defense is not that bad. So it's going to be interesting to see these offenses, who can get it. But that being said, Stefan, I think this game could get down to special teams, and sometimes that's an Achilles heel for Mike Leach. Where do you feel the special teams are this year?
Yeah, I think that game against Bowling Green, he said, was probably the best special teams game that he's had while he's been at State. I mean, the kicking troubles are well documented, right? Like even I can't remember what the kickers did against A&M, because I think State was mostly scoring touchdowns when they were getting opportunities. But everyone knows that Arkansas game where Leach, came to the post-game presser and called for an open tryout at kicker immediately after. So the kicking struggles kind of carried into this year. They got a couple transfers in, a guy from Coastal Carolina and a guy from Northern Colorado. And Massimo Biscardi, the guy from Coastal Carolina, missed 2 extra points to start that game at Arizona. And for whatever reason, he's just really struggled with extra points in his career, more so than he struggled with field goals, which is just odd. And Leach made the switch and brought in Raybon. And then Raybon misses an extra point at LSU, and everyone's like, all right, or maybe Mississippi State's just cursed when it comes to kickers. But then Raybon's made every kick since then. He made a 53-yarder against Bowling Green this past weekend. So it appears that they're pretty comfortable with him. And in the kickoff game, he's been pretty good in terms of just kicking the ball out of the back of the end zone to eliminate a return game. What's really been interesting is the punting this year. I mean, the punting for Mississippi State's been really good. I think half of their punts or somewhere close to that have, pinned teams inside the 20. They had a guy, they brought in Georgopoulos, which is a great college football name, from UMass to punt alongside Archer Trafford. They have two punters that kind of take turns, and they're both really good. So like you said, in games like this, I think the spread when I saw it was 3 points for Mississippi State. It's probably fluctuated since then. But, as you get to the stretch of SEC play where a lot of these games are going to be close, and I think this weekend's game is going to be close, field position and punting matters a lot. And I think that's one place where Mississippi State feels pretty confident in what they had. So I'm really interested. We watch these games and we talk about Mike Leach's offense and the Texas A&M defense and vice versa and all these components. And I'm like, maybe the punting could be pretty fun to watch this weekend.
Yeah, so I think the thing that most people around here in Texas really want to know about is the Mike Leach isms. What's your favorite Mike Leach story so far, either from your time on the beat or this season?
Yeah, I will say my first year on the beat last year, I was doing a story about Mike Leach's time while he was in law school, over at Pepperdine. And, like it is with Leach so many times, it was a late night, interview. Like he'll call you when he's ready, and it's probably like 10, 11 p.m. And the phone call went about like 3 hours. And, we probably talked about law school for 30 minutes. and we just went on a tangent. My family's from Serbia originally. So, been to Europe a lot of times visiting family and kind of the surrounding countries and whatnot. And he's a guy that loves to travel. He's a huge history guy. So we talked about, all the places that he's been to, all the random things that he's done for so long. So that's definitely my favorite story. Probably not as funny as maybe some other ones. He gave some wedding advice again a couple weeks ago to, the third string quarterback, Chance Lovertich, got engaged after that Memphis game. And Leach was like, well, you made him, I've come around too late because you're already engaged now. But the number one thing is make sure you elope and get the wedding done, get it out of the way if you're going to do it. Do it during the bye week when you're not doing anything. So that was definitely the highlight. But he doesn't shy away, specifically when it comes to A&M. He doesn't shy away from trash talking and bringing up some of his success that he had at Texas Tech and obviously last year's win. And he talks about how much he loves Kyle Field, and he says he likes the A&M fans, and them not liking him is probably a good measure for the success he's had. So he's not afraid to trash talk when it comes to this team.
Hey, what about Stefan? I never thought about it. Most of the times, I think when A&M's gone over there, it's been a day game like it is now. Thankfully not 11 a.m. Is it more? Does Mississippi State feel it's more of a home field advantage for them to have an afternoon game, or are they a night game? I don't even know if A&M's had a night game over there in the time they've been in.
Yeah, I mean Leach doesn't like playing day games. I mean he's a guy that likes to sleep in and stay up late, so he would prefer a night game. So it's weird, it's weird, but I'm interested to see what the environment looks like. The 3 o'clock kick is that's probably a good one. They'll probably get a good turnout. State got the 11 a.m. game against Arkansas next week, so they're not too thrilled about that. They were hoping to have a little bit of a later environment for that. But overall, and I'm interested actually to get your guys' thoughts. I know you talk about the day games, but overall A&M, it seems like since they've come to the SEC, Mississippi State, for whatever reason, has been a bit of an Achilles heel. I think the series is split since A&M joined. Yes. It's 5-5. I mean, yes. Is there a sense like in College Station at all that's like for some reason they just can't get it going against Mississippi State? Because there's teams like LSU and even Ole Miss sometimes and Bama and Auburn, when they're having good years, they're kind of counting on beating Mississippi State. And I'm curious with A&M, with the expectations that they have, is it, is there some pressure on Jimbo to pull this one out?
Well, there's always pressure, Stefan, but you hit on it. A&M fans hate that they do poorly against both Mississippi schools because, as you mentioned, they're 5-5, and I think they've lost three of the last 6 or whatever with Ole Miss. I mean, Ole Miss as well. So A&M hates the Mississippi schools because they own Arkansas, 10 of 11. Of course, everybody does not do that well against Alabama. In Auburn, no one has to worry about Auburn anymore the way what they're doing. So it's really the Mississippi schools that irritate a lot of A&M fans.
The Mississippi State has always done a really good job defensively against A&M's offense, and there's been other factors in that as well. If you go back to 2016, A&M comes into Mississippi State ranked number 4 in the first college football playoff poll, and Trevor Knight gets hurt, and they have to go to the backup quarterback, Jake Hubneck, and they can't really move the ball under with him at quarterback, and things kind of peter out there. But Mississippi State's defensive front has always caused havoc against A&M's offensive line in the past. 2017, they had all those offensive line struggles through the season. So I think it's just that A&M or Mississippi State's defense has pretty much always had A&M's number on offense in those games.
They've had those NFL players. I mean, you look at the defensive backs, the line. Then you throw in now Leach comes in. He's got the quarterback. What Rogers can do, and like I said, A&M. Shea Patterson's a bad name around here. They take the red shot off him against Mississippi. Just something about the Mississippi and the Mississippi State schools drive A&M crazy. And of course, they get Mississippi at home this year. They lost to Mississippi last year, so it's one of those deals. If they can beat the 2 Mississippi schools this year, they're probably going to have a good season. It's hard to say that. Like you said, you think, well, now Arkansas's in the rearview mirror again. You beat the 2 Mississippi schools, and you think you don't have to worry about Auburn. So that gets back what you said, Stefan. This is why this is a 1 or 2 point game. It's a big game for A&M, and it's a big game for Mississippi State too.
Yeah, no, and I'll follow up on that. I mean, for Mississippi State, a lot of the fans had the expectations of, an 8-4 type of season, and this stretch right here where they're home against A&M, home against Arkansas, and then at Kentucky, before you got to play Alabama. I mean, if you go 2-1 in that stretch, you look at Auburn and East Tennessee State in November, you kind of pencil those in as wins at this point. You're looking at 7 wins probably going into the Egg Bowl, and Leach is 0-2 in the Egg Bowl, and that's a huge game. And like if you get to 8 wins with an Egg Bowl win, suddenly people are looking at Mike Leach's tenure at Mississippi State as a really successful one. You go 7-5 again, or even 6-6 with a loss in the Egg Bowl. People are going to start getting a little bit uneasy because of that. The overall record is going to be below 500 for him still because of that 4-7 season in 2020. So this, I think it sets up, and you don't want to say it's a must win just because it's so early in the year. But for both of these teams, I mean, for A&M with their expectations of at least being in a New Year's 6, and Mississippi State with their expectations of hoping to get to 8 wins, I mean, it's about as big of a game for both teams because you look down the road and both these teams still have to face, Alabama. Both these teams still have the heart of SEC play left to go. And it's early, but it's a big one this weekend.
And that 0-2 in the Egg Bowl is extra glaring for this matchup too, because Texas A&M now has a defensive coordinator, DJ Durkin, who was over there at Ole Miss for those games, and were able to stop that air raid offense of Mike Leach. Let's close it out with this. What is your kind of keys to the game, your points of emphasis that you think Mississippi State needs to accomplish if they're going to win this bout?
Yeah, number one is you hit it right there with DJ Durkin and the battle of the trenches, particularly with Mississippi State's offensive line versus A&M's defensive line. Sam Williams and that Ole Miss crew for Durkin last year put a lot of pressure on Will Rogers, and Will Rogers talked about that the other day and was like, yeah, I know what DJ Durkin brings, and he's probably going to bring some heat again. So that's the number one thing. Number two, I think, is special teams. A muff punt or something here or there could wind up deciding the game. A missed field goal could be huge. A made field goal down the stretch could be huge. So I would say State's offensive line versus A&M's defensive line, and then the special teams factor, I think, are the two most important things. You could probably add in there too Mississippi State's receivers against A&M's defensive backs, just because of how deep and fresh that receiver group can be with the substitutions that they have. How does A&M try to match that and get some fresh bodies on the field? Because against Bowling Green, for whatever reason, Leach ran a bit more up tempo. So that's another interesting component, is how will those defensive backs hang in there against a deep wide receiver group for Mississippi State.
Well, let the people know how they can find you on social media and where they can find your work to help preview this matchup this weekend.
Yeah, follow all our work at Clarion-Ledger.com. My buddy Nick Suss covers Ole Miss for us too. So, when that matchup comes around, Clarion-Ledger.com, if you guys are looking to read about A&M's opponents. And on Twitter, it's at SKRAJISNIK3.
Great. Well, thanks so much for giving us a few minutes of your time to help us preview this game this weekend. Be sure to check out his stuff, and also be sure to check out theeagle.com and The Eagle as we continue to prepare for Texas A&M's trip to Mississippi State. For those of you watching on the video, thanks so much for watching. If you're listening to the My Aggie Nation podcast, we appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next week.